So let me introduce, our esteemed panel, on the webinar today. We have Dr. Dinesh Dua with us, CEO and Director of Nectar Life Sciences Limited, which is one of the larger growing biopharma and API players from North India. He also, in fact, plays a key role in the pharma industry's, betterment as the chairman of PharmaExcel, which is the largest association of pharma exporters from India. He's also on the CII's North Committee, helping bridge the gap in between the industry and the government, which at this juncture, as we can imagine, is a very, very important, mission to play. We also have Mr. Bhatia with us. Mr. Bhatia is the Group President and CFO for Uflex Limited. Uflex is India's largest packaging player with almost $1 billion plus top line, and more importantly, a very, very wide footprint of plants and operations both in India and overseas, serving some of the largest global and Indian giants in the consumer space, whether it's pharma, whether it's FMCG, foods and other sectors which need packaging support. And then we also have Mr. Deepal Shah, CFO for Alcargo Logistics. Alcargo, as most of you may know, is India's largest integrated logistics solutions provider with a very wide footprint across some 160 countries, and also, in fact, playing a key role going ahead in inland logistics in India as an end-to-end supply chain solutions player to them, including warehouses, I think, in about 40-45 different locations. So welcome, gentlemen, Dr. Dua, Mr. Bhatia, and Deepal. Thank you for taking time out. The first question, in fact, that comes to my mind is, to you, Dr. Dua. Pharma sector has been one of the key success stories from India, with upwards of $45-50 billion in top line today, both domestic and exports put together. It has also been, in that sense, classified rightfully as an essential, sector, along with staples and other food commodities that serve our daily needs. Through the lockdown phase 1 to 4, what's been the experience? It obviously has been a trying and uncertain, set of circumstances. How did you manage your supply chains? The logistic involved in running multiple plants, and please let us know also, for the broader industry apart from Nectar, what was that experience, and including people availability of the key staff in all locations. How's that experience been from March, last week till now? I think we'll have to sort of wait till Dr. Dua comes back with a stable connection. Mr. Bhatia, let me start with you in that case.
Yeah.
So Uflex, of course, like I said earlier, has a very wide network of operations, both domestically and overseas. And to go through this kind of an uncertain phase across so many operations must have been an equally big challenge for you. Sticking for a moment to the pharma line, what probably has been the experience of managing these challenges, both in terms of operations, getting your supply chains continuously running and working with you all in tandem, and at the same time ensuring your end produce ends up reaching critical customers, whether it's in pharma or the FMCG space. How's been that experience so far?
Thanks, Vinod, for giving us an opportunity. And yes, because we are in packaging industry, so we are amongst the the list of industries that fall in the essentials. And because 90-95% of our packaging is for the pharma as well as for the food, largely for the food and less for the pharma's Uflex business. And so I'll divide my experience into two parts: local in India and overseas.
Mm-hmm.
So overseas, because we are essential to packaging, and there was a general tendency for the people that they didn't want to turn up to the stores each time for small purchases. So people tend to buy large stocks, with the result that the shelves became empty in no time overseas as well as in India. And obviously there was requirement for more packaging, which because overseas the businesses didn't, lockdown was not the same that we experienced in India, where we virtually closed down everything, and whatever we opened was through government. Guy on the street does not understand, so virtually everything came to a standstill for the few days. But overseas, there were no disruptions, there were no supply chain issues, whether it was our raw material or it was our finished goods which we were to send to our customers. And happy to say that, probably March and April were probably the best months for us in terms of the raw material sourcing, the production, as well as the supplies. India's situation was very different from than what we experienced in overseas. And when I say overseas, we are in countries like USA, we are in Poland, we are in Hungary, we are in Egypt, we are in UAE, then we are in Mexico, and then we are in Nigeria. So all these countries put together, the sum and substance is that there were no disruptions and the business was a normal, and rather the volumes were much more. But India, given that the way the lockdown happened and everybody was asked to close, and the only relaxations given to certain essentials was through a geo where the dissemination of information down to the person who's actually controlling the traffic on the road is not there. So we had whatever issues we could have, we had including again sort of going back to the word of regulatory approvals, like taking approvals from the district authorities. So they would not have an idea as to how many people to be allowed. So you will have restrictions on that. And then the major problem was that even if you've produced, you've got people in, whatever numbers they approve, what happens to when you produce and then you have to transport it, and then during that phase, the trucks are being stopped, the driver is being beaten. So everybody is so hesitant. How do the drivers and his assistant reach the truck? So we had a whole lot of issues for the next 8-10 days till the time there were more emphasis being laid on that every type of movement is allowed, whether it is essential or non-essential. Because initial the thought process, the people on the ground was that only the essential is allowed, and then they were supposed to check probably each and every cargo movement, whether it is essential or non-essential, became very cumbersome initially. That was the understanding, but I think later the better sense prevailed, and they came out with the clarifications that goods movement of any sort is allowed. Uh, the freight rates went up because the truckers started asking for more freight because they were not sure of whether they'll get the return freight. So yes, for the first phase of the lockdown one, there were all sorts of problems, and largely because our media, who is more happy about showing the distress created out of the coronavirus rather than actually disseminating the information down to the people as to what are the relaxations the government has given and how they have to be managed. So managing the situation on the ground, only the truck driver and his assistant have to manage, and there's no way to communicate with them. But yes, there were challenges, and that's why in April we saw that we never stopped our plant except for a period of a couple of days when the goods could not move and we had issues in terms of the storage capacity at
So
our
if I may just ask, Mr. Bhatia, what kind of utilization levels did you see in April, and what do you see now in May or going ahead?
So April, we have different businesses. So April, it was from 20% to 120%. And May, the numbers which were lower at 20, 40, they are about now 65 to 80% levels, and the businesses where we had already 80 and above, they are all at between 100 to 100 and 120%. So the May has been definitely a better month, and the order book is probably so strong at this point in time today that if I have more capacity, probably I can produce more.
That's heartening, and I'm just going to park that. I'm going to come back to you on what that means in terms of future plans on the supply chain. Let me just go back to Dr. Dua now that he's back with us. Dr. Dua, welcome again. I think what we essentially want to understand is from a pharma supply chain point of view, continuing operations and ensuring your products or the drugs eventually reach the last shelf. What was really the experience in terms of managing your suppliers, your production, people, and the last mile logistics starting March last week till now?
Thank you, Vinod. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Oh, excellent. This technology can let you down at any point in time. So I pray and hope and keep my fingers crossed that things work out pretty fine as now. So you see, pharma, as you know, is essential industry for the country and for the world. And as you're aware, India is right up there. We are the pharmacy to the world, and Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji has acknowledged it. He's appreciated the industry. And we supply to 206 out of 211 countries. We have a pristine and prime position of being the largest supplier of generic post-patent drugs. Practically everywhere. We control 40% of the volumes in the United States, which is a robust $200 billion industry in the generic space, not in the innovation space. And we control, on a weighted average, something like 30% in Europe, and all over the world, close to about 28%. Now, with this backdrop, when the lockdown happened in the last week of March 2020, you see there is this principle of 20-80. 20% of the goods get shipped out in the first 3 weeks, and 80% out in the last week. That's dynamically the case all over the world. So we missed out big time in March. In terms of exports, my knock rate was something like 12% year on year. I was exporting close to about $1.8 to $2 billion worth of pharmaceuticals to God knows how many countries. I lose track. I lost $1 billion in that. So from a heady growth, exports growth, which was one of the exceptions for India, because India was going completely downhill in exports in a big way. Pharmaceutical industry, as my boss in Ministry of Commerce, Piyush Goyal ji says, was the jewel in the crown. We were growing by 12% until January, but in came COVID in China, and the supply chain got disrupted both in terms of supplies to India, and they supply substantially the APIs for domestic market, and of course exports as well. So we dropped to about 8%, and lo and behold, because of this 80-20 principle not operating properly because of lockdown in March, we lost close to about $1 billion, and I de-grew for the first time in the last 36 months by 23%. So the growth of India in terms of exports came down to 8%, and my number was close to about $21 billion from a level of $19.5 billion in the last year-on-year comparison. So that was the first disruption. And immediately after lockdown, all the flights were canceled, as you know. Nothing was coming in, nothing was going out. No shippers were touching India at all. JNPT went on an absolute closure mode. Customs was not there. And all of this combined together led to a drop in productivity to close to about 20%. Now, coming to what Rajesh said, we work very closely with 3 ministries: Ministry of Commerce, which is our parent ministry in Fomexo, and we work with Ministry of Health. And I'm very proud to say that our Minister Harshvardhan ji now is the Director General of WHO. Now that's the kind of value addition India is doing in the healthcare space. So, and then we have for APIs, for the bulk pharma, something called Ministry of Chemicals and Fertilizers. So I deal with all the 3 ministries, bureaucrats, ministers, and so on and so forth. We went on the rooftop and said, look, we are essential industry. We should be allowed to operate. The notifications of Ministry of Home Affairs, MHA, were not being interpreted properly. So that was a big, huge, massive struggle in the beginning. We got over that. We kick-started very well in Punjab, where my plant is located, huge plant in 120 acres, 3,100 people, So there, the additional chief secretary, amazing indeed. She allowed us with proper SOPs, because we are a regulated industry. Our SOPs are so stringent that they go 200% beyond what MHA mandates. So with that, Mrs. Vinnie Mahajan, the additional chief secretary and in charge of industries, gave us the permission to operate. But the only state which has been a point of pain and point of bother has been Himachal Pradesh. Himachal Pradesh has been a formulation cluster, which is the mainstay of our exports. They were at 0 in the last week of March. Come in April, we were operating at about 60% in Punjab. And currently we are operating at about 80%, because you can't because the product basket in pharma, you can't operate at 100%. You operate at about 80. 80 is equivalent to 100 and thereabouts, right? With that, even today, Himachal Pradesh is not letting loose. They've become draconian to our industry. And unfortunately, the capacity utilization is only about 30%. With that, both the domestic and the exports have taken a hit. Himachal contributes with 700 formulation facilities, close to about 40% of the domestic consumption. So the domestic consumption has taken a beating, 20% beating on the exports. And in spite of that, very happy to inform you that in April, we not only leveled pegged last year, April to April 19 versus 20, we've registered a marginal growth of about 0.257% to be precise. And in May, I'm looking forward to significant growth. I'll get back to my base of $2 billion a month, and that's where it stays. So in spite of all the disruptions, in spite of all the lockdowns, in spite of the fact that various state governments and functionaries at different levels in the government interpreted the notifications very differently, hats off to Department of Pharmaceuticals, the Honorable Secretary there, Mr. Vakela, as well as Joint Secretary, Mr. Rinwa. They work at times 24/7, my own ministry. All of them intervene, and today we are in a position where the domestic will grow at about 7 to 8% as against 10%, and exports will continue to grow at 12%. That's my firm belief. So we've had a mix of everything in supply chain disruption, but being entrepreneurial in nature, I think as compared to China, the pharmaceutical industry is at least 20 years ahead outside of API. I'll come to API at a later point in time as to what initiatives are we taking. We, as a country, we are vulnerably insecure in terms of the APIs which come in from China in a very significant way. You'll be very surprised to know that 90% of our API requirements for an industry which is worth about $22 billion in domestic is based on Chinese APIs and key starting raw materials. So we work very closely with all the governments, with the central government and the state governments, and made sure that in the next 10 years' time, we should become self-sufficient in pharmaceuticals APIs.
No, that's very helpful, Dr. Dua. I'm going to come back to you with regards to this huge bottleneck, that got created because of, lack of Chinese, API inputs coming in, and then what could be the long-term solution to that. But let me just, bring in Deepal. Deepal at Alcargo, of course, you guys have, worked across a spectrum of, end customers, right from large equipment and sort of bulk cargo to also your supply chain, management practice. But let me get a little deeper in trying to understand the fact that logistics eventually is still a little people-driven industry. While of course there are large, transport and vehicle modes available, right from loading and unloading to the people who actually drive those trucks on the ground, right, on the roads. What's sort of been, the journey in the last 2 months, and then how have you been able to sort of still support some of your customers, with availability issues at a people level also?
See, in the last 2 months, from March, last week of March, once the lockdown was announced, it was a little bit sudden in the sense that, though there was one day on Sunday, which, was kind of indirectly a preparatory one, but nobody expected that, there'll be a sudden complete lockdown. So a lot of arrangement in terms of what all we need to do, I mean, if there was not much of a large window available to arrange things, to make sure that, things operate, work from home operates very smoothly. So our, like you very rightly said, our industry is highly people driven industry. So, everything is, we're trying to digitize a lot of it, but we work with multiple authorities, from the customs to the ports to the customers to the shipping lines to the airlines. So not all of them are completely digitized. So the flow of information, the flow of activity is not completely digital. Even documents are not completely digital in many cases, and still we continue to operate in a highly, brick and mortar kind of environment. So yes, it's a people-driven industry. I would divide the entire thing into 2 parts. One is the international logistics, which is from port to port, and the logistics, which is inland logistics, which is domestic logistics. The international logistics falls under essential services, and globally all the ports continue to operate. So all the ports, though ships were not calling, cargoes were not available, there were capacity constraints, many some other things did come up. But all of these days, ships did land into all of the ports and ships did leave. So international, the cargo movement continued to happen. There were challenges probably for exporters on our side because on the domestic front we had a larger challenge. On the domestic front, the entire domestic transportation movement, like my colleagues said, um faced a lot of challenge. In the Ministry of Home Affairs came up with a circular very clearly mentioning essentials and non-essentials are allowed to move very clearly. In fact, they have been very proactive. They also, I think, there were some videos which they came on to the news and they were circulated. But still, I think the implementation of the movement was, an understanding at various authorities across India. Uh, had a lot of practical challenges. People were not very clear about what to be allowed and what not to be allowed. So transportation suffered a lot. And other than that, because of this whole COVID situation, a lot of drivers left. So apart from the transporters themselves who are running the trucks, the people who are actually driving them were missing. A lot of them tried to kind of stay away or not come to work. So domestic transportation and domestic distribution faced quite a bit of a challenge. Things are kind of smoothing up a little bit. While this domestic transportation challenges did come up, what happened was that all the cargo that came into the ports all kind of got stuck at the CFSs, at the container freight stations. So freight stations started to kind of balloon up in terms of their capacities, and there was a lot of capacity fully filled, and we are looking to have places where we could keep containers. So that thing particularly happened at the ports. What has happened in 2 months? Exports have been hit. Imports did continue to come in. Imports were not massively hit. That we strongly believe, because supply chain generally has a little bit of a lag. When you order, you actually get it after a month or month and a half. So probably people who ordered somewhere up to mid of March were expecting their containers to be coming, not necessarily from China, because China also opened up by March, much of it. And apart from the Wuhan region, some of the other parts of China did continue to operate. So we did see a lot of cargo come in. We didn't see saw a large drop of cargo drop in terms of exports. And domestic, like we all said, that except for very essential domestic, especially the distribution companies faced a lot of challenges. On the storage front, on the warehousing front, we faced issues in terms of labor, where at many places we found labor missing, and we had to operate the warehouse. Luckily, there weren't much movements, there weren't much kind of issuances and deliveries that were happening during that period. So we could manage practically well. In some places, we did kind of house the labor inside and allow them to go. We provided them all the respective facilities. Even in the container freight stations at the port, we have created space for people to be secure inside the premise and operate, so that they don't have to expose themselves to the external environment and keep operating. So these are some of the measures that we took actually to make sure that life continues to be normal. Our office was completely empty. Most of us have laptops, so we could very easily move back home. What we also did is, where those people who had desktops, we actually allowed them to take their desktops home. And what we did is, there's a dongle available which you can plug in into, because desktop generally doesn't have a Wi-Fi, but there's a dongle you can plug in and you can still use the internet. So immediately we said that those who need to take their desktop home, they can take a cab and take their desktop home. So with all this around, the back office operated from home. the field operations staff were housed either in the warehouse or the CFS, and they kind of managed to operate from there. And for us, we believe that we have been able to operate almost I've not seen any breakage in our services, more or less. Now very recently, since the transportation network has improved, the trucks are coming in, the deliveries from the CFSs have increased starting from mid of April. So last around 1 month or so, we've seen a fairly good amount of out of charges happening from the CFSs. So it's been though, I mean, new way to work, but very hectic though. I mean, too much happening on calls and too much happening around, trying to get things done. But we've been able to operate. There is no doubt about it. So we haven't got stuck anywhere on that.
No, this is interesting, Deepal. I think as a digital-only company, for us, working from home obviously came a little more easily than probably some of the traditional brick and mortar companies out there. But I think some of the points you raised were quite interesting. The ability to allow people to take desktops home and stay connected in some form. I think at least will ensure that as a service player, you do whatever is needed to get your customers going.
So Vinod, what happened was that it was difficult. I think laptops weren't available in the market at that point of time, even if we had to secure them to buy them. So I believe I was traveling at that point of time, and they called me. I said, best thing is just give them taxi money, tell them to take the desktops, get the dongles. We just got the dongles overnight, and we just shipped them everybody home with their desktops. And each and every person is doing everything. So we allowed some of these guys who do a lot of documentation to also take the printers home, so that they can kind of scan from home, work from home. So I think we've not had much of a disruption. I mean, yes, maybe 1 or 2 days we struggled a little, but it's been a smooth ride. I mean, work has been so it allows us to now think that can this model continue? I mean, that's what everybody's scratching their head now.
No, I'm going to hold on that, because that definitely is one of the questions on everybody's mind. Do we really need to go back to office in the same fashion that we did earlier? So I'm going to park that.
Yeah.
Dr. Dua, you obviously spoke about the initial challenge in getting a lot of approvals and state level challenges in terms of disparities on how policies were sort of created or followed. But more importantly, given the larger supply chain that every pharma company also works with, both domestically and overseas, if I were to stick to the domestic aspect, how do you believe the younger players have fared in that space in terms of ensuring the supply chain also stays robust? Because every small or large ingredient is as critical for the end product that you all make, right? I mean, there are very few substitutes for some of the kind of APIs you all make. So how's been that movement? How did you all end up guiding some of the smaller players in your industry to ensure their operations continue?
I think it's a very good question. Look, let me give you the distribution of the manufacturing by various segments of the industry. You see, close to about 100 top-notch companies in the pecking order, they contribute to, in the domestic base, to approximately about 40%, right? Their own manufacturing constitutes about 60%, staggering 60% comes in from the MSME sector, and they were the one who were hardest hit. We as a very large company, $500 million, we always keep 2 to 3 months stock of raw materials, chemicals, and various other inputs to ensure that the supply chain is full. You make sure that you don't miss out on your schedules, because there are thousands of SKUs to cater to, particularly in formulations. Right. API is relatively simpler as compared to the formulations. Formulations like the paint industry, you have so many SKUs. It's a mind-blowing exercise. But the MSME guys require all their inputs on just-in-time basis. And that's why if you look at clusters like Baddi, Solan, Nalagarh, and Himachal, and in Uttarakhand you have Haridwar, and then you have Sikkim, which is a nightmare to manage inventory. Where a truck takes about 20 days to reach out that in the domestic front. So, and Jammu, of course, is another fiscal-oriented and driven area where you have pharmaceutical industry, and Goa for that matter, right? So all of these guys are dependent on supply chain, partners who make sure that everything is made available to them at 7 days notice. Now, they were the ones who were the hardest hit. So the contribution in March from the MSME sector, which is the bone, which is the backbone and the nuclear, nuclear value for the supply chain dimensions, dropped dramatically. In the first week of April, I will not hesitate in saying that these MSME guys who were feeding in the brands and big time, products of MNCs and large companies had to struggle big time. And then, luckily for us, various associations, IDMA, FOPE, OPPI, and various other BDMA for APIs, and we guys in Fomexil got together. We pushed the decision makers in all the 4 ministries that I mentioned earlier, and we got them to intervene consistently, even at times, even at a nagging pace, to make sure that everything was facilitated in terms of transportation. It was a big challenge. As somebody said, the drivers were not available, so we made the owners get the drivers from wherever. Some of the owners, by the way, drove their own trucks to reach out to this MSME sector. So MSME dovetailed beautifully into large pharma to make sure that, with our might, with our reach and outreach to the ministries, we could manage to fill up the coffers in terms of the inputs to the MSME by around the 3rd week of April. And therefore, if you look at the juggernaut of the domestic pharmaceutical industry, it's been growing at about 12 to 13%. We dropped our growth to about 6 to 7% in domestic, but by and large now, the issues have been sorted out and settled with a clarion call given by the captain of the ship, Narendra Modi ji, our Honorable Prime Minister. Everything worked, believe you me, and hats off to all the ministries and secretaries, joint secretaries, undersecretaries. They were working shoulder to shoulder with the entire industry. And we made sure that the MSME sector does not stand to suffer, except, of course, as I stated earlier, Himachal Pradesh continues to be a pain point for us. So to cut the story short, by and large, in about first 15 to 20 days, the MSME sector suffered a lot. But amongst those MSME sector guys also, there were some street smart 10 to 15% who could foresee things happening from December, because China was first afflicted. Some of these guys discussed with us that it could be a repeat of SARS, MERS, or for that matter, Spanish flu, which killed close to about 5 crore people, out of infestation in 50 crore people, 500 million to 50 million, right? So they were street smart in identifying this. They managed their supply chain beautifully and kept 2 to 3 months stock, and that's how they could take advantage of the situation.
One related question, Dr. Dua, is you spoke about people and logistics issues to be managed, apart from, of course, the supply of all the raw material. One obviously missed out point many a times, except for, of course, government discussions around MSMEs, is availability of cash flows, right?
Absolutely.
Without money flowing freely on a normal basis, it becomes difficult for MSMEs because, like you rightly said, they maintain very low inventories, right? It's more just in time. Our experience says that MSMEs unfortunately have no choice but even operate their finances in many ways in a just-in-time manner. So how's been sort of that sort of challenge that they have solved, or at an association level, what do you think has been possible to do to help those MSMEs?
I think the most stressed industry component, right, which was really short of cash starved, if you allow me to use the term, was basically MSME, right? They did not have money to pay the salaries for April. March they paid, all right? Unequivocally, practically 90% of the MSME players said very categorically, and there was a big furor, as you understand, going, they're barely able to meet the expenses, and then you have the issue of the salaries not being given to the employees, right, going away. So MSME was deeply stressed, and it's thanks to folks like yourself that, and of course, a few bankers here, a little bit of government intervention. The MSME sector, in spite of all the efficiencies that they brought in, still continue to suffer from a cash-strapped situation today. I think the most important thing is to survive, and this is going to continue for 6 months, and then you'll have another 6 months of revive. And after a year, if COVID kind of tones down, the curve flattens, as is the case in the US, Europe, China, and so on and so forth, you can afford to look forward to thriving, after about 2 years thereabout. So first is survival, And I think in this survival struggle, what is most important is working capital. There have been some announcements by RBI this morning. There would be some relief. Honorable Finance Minister has tried her best to come to the rescue, but still, we in CII, I'm also the chairman of CII North India, Life Sciences and Pharmaceuticals, believe you me, 90% of our membership continues to struggle big time for oxygen in terms of their cash requirements on a day-to-day basis, particularly for the working capital.
So definitely more needs to be done, and I will touch upon that, in the final round of questions, Dr. Dua. Thank you so much on this. Mr. Bhatia, as we understand, packaging is also, quite a, sort of spread out industry. There are some very, very large and super serious players, like Uflex in terms of the kind of quantum of work you all do. But there are also some 20,000 plus MSMEs in different industrial clusters who supply some last mile packaging, inputs that go into manufacturing industries, as well as to some extent the regional consumer brands. What's your assessment of the kind of situation they might have been in now, over the last 60 days of changes of policy and support? Do you think they are now in a position to be able to take on from here any recovery in volume, or there are challenges that need to be handled both from a material availability point of view as well as a logistics point of view?
So I think in our industry, as you said, that there are small players which may be falling in MSMEs, and that's what we call them as an unorganized segment of the market. So this industry was categorized as essential and was allowed to open, but nobody opened because they probably didn't have all that infrastructure to go to the district authorities for taking their permissions, or having that labor back. So I think for the first 60 days, 45 days, nobody started, and because we could do that because we are almost a fully integrated player in our business. So we had that advantage. But if you talk of all these small players in the industry, so for about 45 days nobody opened. They are only opening up for the last 10-15 days or so, and clearly they have their own challenges now because the labor is not going to come back. And during this period, we use some of the very different ways to have the labor back. So for the month of April, we've rather given incentive to the people who reported for the work, because end of the day, everybody is also under a huge fear factor that you may contract this virus. And so the contractors, the normal contractors which were working for us, they were not able to mobilize that labor. So what we did, we asked our labor to call up their colleagues and told them that whosoever turns up will get paid the next day. So that really these two factors, all the employees who are on the permanent roles, we giving some sort of an incentive to them to turn up, and getting the people who are on a contractor side that whatever you do work today, you will get paid tomorrow. So that people then showed up, because through the contractors, they weren't even sure that contractor will take the money, and end of the day when their wage day comes, they'll not get that money. So hopefully we pass that situation with those sort of measures. But I can see, because a lot of companies with whom we were not doing business earlier, and though they were large enough, but they always thought that going to a smaller sector saves them some extra pennies, and while Uflex being a large player, fully integrated and all that, may be a bit costly in terms of their pricing. But they all came back, and because they had huge pressures on them to continue supplies and all. So I think it's been a bit of a different experience that we've gone by, and it all comes from within the organization's DNA. And I think we quite happily manage that situation, and could have people back on target. So for us, only except for the design team, which was which could operate from the home. We allowed, like Dipal said, that we allowed people to take away their desktop from the home and do the designing from there. All others were practically asked to be there in the office.
In a way, some signs of maybe consolidation, if not in terms of number of players, at least in terms of demand gravitating towards the more serious and capable players. Do you see that as a trend, possibly going beyond your packaging industry in general to other sectors also in terms of services that corporates seek?
I really don't think so, because I think what they will only try to do is, because the price differential is too much. So what they will only try to do is that give us some small share of the business just to keep us warm. And when the good time returns, the normal time returns, I think the pricing points are they don't want to. They will probably go back to the same way. Like we are all saying that end of the day, because of this virus, people will hate China. But I have no doubt in saying that 6 months down the line, the memory is too short. People will go to China for cost considerations.
That's a, if I can say, a very interesting and slightly contrarian view to the general sentiment, Dr. Bhatia, Mr. Bhatia. But thanks for sharing that. Let me bring in Deepal again. So Deepal, you did spend some time talking about the fact that eventually people availability is going to be one of the key factors in a sector like yours, logistics, warehousing, overall. But over a period of time, because of the kind of situation we are all in, do you see the scope for more automation? Do you see the scope for more mechanized activity?
I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now, Deepal?
No, Vinod, I lost you. I think my internet was unstable. So
Okay.
can I request you to repeat the question,
Sure.
please?
So I think essentially the fact that we both mentioned about people being a key constituent in the overall logistics or all related material movement space, whether it's warehousing, right, whether it's loading, unloading at the last location, starting from the port to the client disembarkation site as such. Do you now see the need and scope for more automation coming into the industry? India obviously has been not very high on automation given the normal availability of labor, but do you see that changing in coming months or years?
Yeah, so actually, there are very interesting questions on the chat. I've answered some of them actually around the automation and the consolidation and all. So I was busy typing that as well. So yeah, I mean, automation is obviously the future for logistics. That's the key. In India, we haven't been automating as much for dual reasons. One is it's a high cost, in terms of automation. It's a lot of investments. A lot of companies on the logistics front want to go asset light. Second is the availability of labor, I mean, at a reasonable price. So, that is, so each business would weigh its pros and cons and would decide. But as time goes by, probably to get efficiencies in, automations of most of the processes will be a key, and many of us are actually looking towards that. So I don't know whether you have had the opportunity at the warehousing front also. I mean, there are small automations that that we have been working on. So earlier in the CFS, I'm a couple of years back, and if you bring a container into the CFS, containers are all lying all over the place, and you can't find your container actually where it is. It takes an hour actually to find the container when you want to do an out of charge. Now we have the RFIDs stuck onto the container as soon as it comes into the CFS, and each one, digitally can actually on from the app can see where its container is. So it takes just a minute, which was taking a 2-hour time, with just a few seconds to know exactly where your container is. So these things are happening in bits and pieces. On the domestic warehousing front, we are already using sorters, the orbiters, and many other things that we're using to digitize and help improve efficiencies. Because finally, if the volume goes up, there's limitation in terms of labor also to achieve a certain amount of efficiency. So their automation will be pushed in. So yes, we do believe that there is a huge opportunity for automation, and it will happen. The process has been slow because of both of these reasons which I explained, the investment and the reasonable labor cost. But that's the future.
So it will sort of be a mixed journey, I guess, right? There'll be some segments, like you said, where automation will continue, and there'll be others where, as long as labor is available, we will continue to benefit from it. But one related last question on that front, Deepal, is there's obviously been a lot of change in thought process post GST getting rolled out, right? Mm-hmm. Where now there is a a larger chance of long haul shipment in terms of even inland road movement, and far lower number of larger integrated warehouses rather than having depots in multiple states. How does that sort of materially change the situation or perspective on the logistics industry?
Yeah, so that's a big change actually, and I don't know if many people have noticed. Post GST, the whole warehousing space, the domestic logistics space, has actually changed, and over the last 3 years, there's a huge amount of interest in that. A lot of large private equity players have also invested a lot into the domestic warehousing space, and that sector's heated up. Which was once, because of the whole the sales tax regime at the individual states, and all the entry exit challenges that everybody had, and the documentation around that, we used to have very small regional, not very high-end warehouses, makeshift kind of storage facilities, what we actually call them. This will change to very large multi-user facilities, large warehouses, multimodal logistics parks, where it could also be connected by rail. A container can come, you can store a container also, you can de-stuff it, you can store it as a warehouse, you can do distribution from there. It can be, most of this will come along the dedicated freight corridor. If you're aware, there is a dedicated freight corridor. There are 2 dedicated freight corridors, the west and the east, which the government is working on. Timelines have been extended, but we believe that over the next few years it will come. So along the dedicated freight corridor, all these warehouses will come up, they'll spring up. Larger grade A warehouses will be the future, and we'll see these smaller ones non-compliant, more particularly, the larger companies want compliant warehouses. Many of you, if you're from Bombay, if you hear there's a place, Bhiwandi, which is close to Bombay, off the city limits. That was a hub for warehousing because it was outside the city limits. Most of the warehouses over there are non-compliant, and you see fires happening there very regularly. So that's very risky. So all that is going to go away. That's going to be brushed aside. Larger companies are going to look at these large A-grade warehouses, and we'll see a huge demand coming up in the next few years in those warehouses.
Now, this I think will be something to watch out for, I assume, for all of us, Deepal, because supply chains eventually are integrated to the whole, warehousing and transport pipeline. So, we look forward to, see that evolve over the next year or so. Given all these circumstances, there's obviously been, like I said, a lot of challenges that, industries have seen, but it might also end up throwing some sense of opportunities, at least for some sectors. And Dr. Dua, you also did bring up the point that China obviously controlled a large part of the pharma value chain in terms of the supplies. Do you look at this now as an opportunity to change that, with India going a lot more, deeper in terms of backward integration and improving its capabilities in terms of, managing API, manufacturing on its own, and thus controlling the end pharmacy, role that you mentioned, as a pharmacy to the world, consolidating its position further? Does India now stand to gain from the overall debate raging around cutting down Chinese supply chain reliance?
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you. You see, it's a very contemporary question, and I see in chats as well as Q&A, similar question. You see, it's very paradoxical that India exports $4 billion worth of APIs to the regulated markets. When I say regulated, it means United States, Europe, Japan, South Korea, South Africa, Turkey, and so on and so forth. These are very stringent markets. Now, what happens here is that India has the prowess to do regulatory compilation of dossiers, which are close to about 3,000 pages for an API and almost around 5,000 pages for an ANDA abbreviated new drug application for the formulations, right, which are digitally submitted to the regulatory agencies. Now, this is where we score a big point over China. Excuse me. China, although controls almost around 50% of the global API and 90% of Indian domestic API space, they are absolutely way behind us by as much as 20 years in terms of creating regulatory compilation. They've hired a lot of Indians at astronomical salaries to make sure that they, kind of bridge the gap to the extent possible. But Rome was not built in a day. It takes a lot of time to get there for sure. Now, and secondly, you see, India is right up there in terms of compliances to the audits. We have the largest number of ANDAs filed and approved. We have the largest number of plants, including US, as US FDA approved facilities, both API as well as the formulations. And we have the largest filings anywhere in the world. Now, these are huge milestones which have happened just in the last 15 years, thereabouts. Now, if you can have so much of ascendancy over China in the space of formulations where they're behind us, why can't we do that in API? The only issue is that API juggernaut of China started about almost around 25 years ago, when the government created major pharma parks of the size of 10,000, 20,000 hectares. They invited the entrepreneurs and the government companies to take land for free. Never happens in India. They said, we'll give you utilities free, right, which is basically the power and water. And we'll provide everything under the sun, including supply chain and transportation and supplies of ingredients, laboratories and effluent treatment facilities. So under one roof, you got everything, you pay nothing, except that you're giving future commitments. It happened for 10 years. There was so much of flourishing of these API companies. It's incredible. And you got to go there. I go there very often. And you will not believe the kind of infrastructure, the quality as well as the length and breadth of vast resources that they've created, including huge amount of warehousing, mind you. And then in the next 5 years, when these guys became self-sufficient, they started charging the money. But still it was payable if able or whenever, as the cliche goes. And then, of course, currently, they're paying through their nose. You'll be very surprised to know that the power pricing and the labor pricing in China is 2x that of India. And in spite of that, with the government's help, some of which is hidden, which we are not able to kind of figure out through anti-dumping duty mechanism and safeguards and various other initiatives, although Indian government has become very proactive. My ministry is working overtime to make sure that ADD safeguards are imposed in 6 months as opposed to 2 years or 3 years or thereabouts. So all of that being said, now the word C or China, I mean, I totally agree with whoever said that people will start going to China, but the word C is an anathema. It's a hate word in the West, particularly with Trump and a few European countries. So 800 companies have been unlisted, number one, through a Senate directive. And then, they're very clear that this is just the beginning in terms of sanctions. And a lot of companies are moving out, unfortunately, on 2 counts, except my domain, which is pharmaceuticals, right? Most of these European and Western companies are relocating to Cambodia, to Vietnam, and to Singapore and Thailand because of 2 issues, 2 problems. And we are at pains to explain that to the ministry. They've reacted very positively, by the way, which is the labor reforms. It's been addressed to by the finance ministry in one of our addresses just a couple of days ago. And of course, the land. Land remains to be the biggest pain point for ease of doing business. If we have moved on to 63, you address these 2 issues, Vinod, and you will be in the top 10 in ease of doing business. So we need to walk the talk in terms of these 2 verticals. In pharmaceuticals, because these 4 or 5 countries in Southeast Asia don't have the bandwidth, for sure, they're way behind India, right? So there is a great opportunity for us to attract as many multinationals as possible, 1. 2, in the API space, India has the technology, India has the wherewithal. If a same API, which is being dumped into India at about 60-70% of your variable cost, right? We are not able to compete in the domestic space. But in the regulated markets, China doesn't stand a chance anywhere except the top 4 or 5 companies like Hysun and a couple of others, right? So that being said, if we can afford to make such wonderful APIs for high-end markets with high-end realization. Why can't we do it for India? So the Indian government has listened to the industry, and I'm very happy and proud to inform you that a cabinet notification came about 4 weeks back stating that we are allocating 14,000 crores to you guys. Out of that, 3,000 crores will go to the pharma parks at the rate of 1,000 crores per park. And these parks are going to be in Andhra, Telangana, which are the hubs of pharmaceuticals, and of course, Himachal. I have my sales doubts about it.
Dr. Dua? Mr. Bhatia, why don't I go ahead with the last question till comes back in full steam. There obviously has been a lot of discussion we had about change in warehousing towards a more integrated approach. Do you see manufacturing also, or for that matter production, right? A number of companies are also now looking at centralizing their production in a post-GST world. But given that some of the COVID and related challenges might continue for the foreseeable future, at least for the next 12 to 18 months, do you see merit in maintaining some bit of decentralization on production, or the gains out of a centralized production will continue to outbeat whatever challenges we see from a state to state, change in policy terms?
So I think what you say is right, but during this period now, people. The first is the survival issue with a lot of organizations now. And let me tell you one thing: in such a competitive world today, if you're not operating above 100% capacity utilization, there's no money to be made actually. So whether we are in our industry, packaging, or other industries, there is clearly going to be an issue of how do you utilize your capacities to the hilt, because somewhere we will all see that the demand softening, people because of the fear don't want to go to shops or go out, and ultimately it will impact everybody if the auto sales are down. So it's a vicious circle across the thing. So there'll be impact on the demand. RBI governor also said today that the first time they officially acknowledged that we're looking at a negative GDP for the fiscal 21. So there'll be issues there. The banks are not too keen to sort of go aggressive on the lending. So I see a whole lot of constraints where people want to move to a decentralized environment as compared to a centralized one. Yes, as we go forward, the globalization is definitely is up for some challenges. Depends on, again, industry to industry. But as I said that, we talk all this when, these things occur. But the moment they are off, we back to doing business as normal and forget a lot more about this. Now, it's not a question of today. We set up various plants in those countries, in some of these countries, while our competition was busy setting up plants at a low-cost jurisdiction like India, and to supply the same products from India. Now clearly, yes, at this point in time when the world is facing this pandemic, there are issues and in the supply chain, and that's why people are preferring the local suppliers. But beyond a point, the cost economics does come into play, and there are going to be still today. Europe is a net importer of the packaging films from across the world, and very large quantities. Now the cost of operations there is almost 3 times of what is there in India. So it will be a long task.
No, that's very helpful. Like you said, I think it'll be industry to industry to figure out what kind of trends we'll see both in centralization versus decentralization. So, thank you so much, all three of you. We are in a way running out of time, but I'll just probably take 1 or 2 questions that, the audience had. Essentially, from a policy point of view, right, Dr. Dua was mentioning about ease of doing business, whether it's availability of land or labor or the other infrastructure, including, warehousing and, other facilities. Do you see need for more, private and government partnership in creating more and more such, easier mechanisms for newer players to set up shops in different states and different locations?
So I think ease of doing business, we've done tremendously well over the years, and we are in a much better position today thanks to a lot of digitization that we've done, which helped us to improve that index. And the dominant position factor there was, when we allowed, online payment of taxes and some of these things, which really helped us move a big needle over there. Yes, we are doing, the government is trying to do its best in terms of attracting people, entrepreneurs to set up manufacturing facilities, whether it is Make in India or Atmanirbhar or any of these programs. And, they are also willing to dole out, they've reduced the tax rates, for the new companies, it's only 15% till certain stage. So the fiscal incentives, as well as some of the other incentives in terms of availability of land and other resources, is not the key. The only situation where we find today India versus China is that there is a lot of labor issues in India. While if you go and see in China, labor might be expensive, but the kind of scales that they have created over there, the kind of discipline in the labor they have over there. So we don't even, sort of. So for a mindset to change where you want to become a factory to the world, to get yourself into a situation like this, the small things actually won't help us to sort of reach that situation. These small things may help us to get some more investment, some more businesses, which in any case we likely to get, because we such huge numbers, and even if we calculate our population increase as well as the people moving from the rural to urban, even that switch will give us that momentum. But a real momentum switch like what China did is a different set of policy framework altogether, which is today not, at least I don't see as a CFO that on horizon, where the banks are reluctant to lend, the capital markets are not too developed. So today we seeing that the large segments, whether it is the mutual funds, whether it is the NBFCs, whether it is the banks, clearly the kind of layer by layer, each of these segments is currently risk averse, and it will become more risk averse, because so you need a different kind of a mindset if you want to plan things at those levels, matching China's level, but some incremental things coming your way, and that will keep on happening, but will not definitely lead to a big swing that what we all are looking for.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Bhatia. I think some of the steps that we've obviously witnessed as a part of the whole, Atmanirbhar and related package announcements, including some states taking initiatives on, labor reforms. I think some of the archaic laws that we have all, been a witness of. Hopefully, we will start seeing changes there to make us a lot more competitive, and obviously create a far new spectrum for larger businesses to start looking at India not only as a consumption base but also as a manufacturing base. So I think on that note, thank you so much, Mr. Bhatia, for taking time out and joining us. Deepal, thank you so much again for sharing all the perspectives. It has been a busy time, and I think there are lots of priorities that you guys set aside to join us on this. So I appreciate you taking time. Thank you again. If at all there are a few more questions that we have not been able to address, we will look forward to get back in touch with you through email to ensure we have responses sent back on them.